Right, so as we've got some Link ECUs in the workshop at the moment, what I decided to do was, we've done all the videos on how to set up your inputs, your outputs, how to take care of all of that. So I thought what I'd do is a quick video on a first startup. What are you going to do once you've received everything, once you've plugged it in, once you've set all the inputs and outputs, and once you are ready to start. So let's get into it. Right, so as discussed, what we're going to do now is just what I call a first startup video. So what do? You've got your harness, you've got it all plugged in, you've been through all the videos, you've set all your inputs and outputs, and now you actually want to come and start the vehicle up for the first time. All right. So effectively what you would normally do is, as part of the videos, and I'm going to put a link up there, you're going to set your base timing. So that means you're going to verify that the timing that the ECU sees and what's actually on the engine is correct. Once you've done that, do bear in mind, especially if you're a fully sequential setup, you can be 360 degrees out. So if one measurement gives you the correct reading, then what you can do is obviously turn it 360 and you can see if it doesn't start on that one and it'll start on the other one, you can just flip it around. Okay, but I do have a video on how to set the base timing. I did put a link up earlier to that one. Second thing I would probably do is disconnect all of the injectors and effectively crank the thing over to make sure you get oil pressure. So it depends on your particular setup. In this case, the customer's got an oil pressure sensor, so he would use that. He would go to this thing, crank it over until you get decent oil pressure. If you had a system with just an oil pressure switch with a light on, crank it over until you see the oil light go out. Then you make sure you've got decent oil pressure in. That's number one. Right, obviously make sure all your fluids are full, so you've got your coolant and everything like that. Obviously you can't bleed it until you get it to start up. That's obvious, but at least you can get it all full and everything and get ready with your funnel as part of the startup procedure. Next up is obviously going to start it. And what I do want to stress in the beginning of this video is whatever you do now on the first startup is going to become completely irrelevant once the engine has been on a dyno and it has been tuned. So number one rule, don't spend 12, 13, 14, 16 a week trying to get everything perfect, because once it's tuned and the VE and ignition table are changed, once it's set up on the dyno, everything you're trying to do with cold start, everything you're trying to do with idle adjustment is going to become completely irrelevant, and it's going to all have to be redone. So keep that in mind. Don't spend a week trying to get everything right. Get it started, get it idling, get it up to temperature. Make sure you got no fuel leaks, make sure you got no oil leaks, make sure you got no water leaks, make sure everything sounds mechanically okay. Play around and tweak with it just to get it to idle and rev up if you need to a little bit. But again, don't spend hours and hours and hours and hours doing it, because as I said, once it gets dyno tuned, everything you've done has been a complete waste of time, because it's all going to have to change. So don't waste your time trying to get everything absolutely perfect, because that is completely pointless. Get it up, get it running, get it to a dyno, get it set up. Then you can start playing around with things if you do want to, but always save a copy of your map before you make any tweaks at all. Okay. Now, a lot of times you hear on the internet, I need a base map, I need this, I can't do this, I can't do that. What I'm going to show you today is going to disprove that entirely. And again, if you want to, you can go to HPA Academy and you can get their courses and they'll show you the exact same thing. But basically what I'm going to do is, now obviously this engine starts. Remember, this video is assuming that you've put all your inputs and outputs, you've tested everything. In this case, your drive-by-wire works and the whole 9 yards. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is, you've got your fresh install, you've got everything in there. Now you want to come to start it. You check your base timing. You know that your drive-by-wire and everything is working exactly as it should. So what I'm going to do now is, there's a couple of things you want to obviously look at as part of this. So number one, we first of all want to connect to the ECU so we can get all of our stuff correct. In this case, obviously, because we are doing a drive-by-wire setup, so what I would probably do is go down and look at my idle control. So bear with me a second. We'll go into electronic throttle. That's fine. We've tested all of that. Right, idle speed control, there you go. So it's just in the corner over there, but I hope this is going to come through. Right, so idle speed control, number one, I'm going to go into the configuration tab at the top there. His mouse on this laptop is terrible. Right, so idle speed control. So at the moment you see we've got IS idle speed control mode. At the moment we're on closed loop E throttle. Now, when you're actually setting it up, once your V table and everything's done, you'd normally go in open loop and you'd set everything up and go from there. When you're just trying to start it for the first time, put some numbers in and let closed loop take care of everything for you, all right? Again, caveat, make sure that your actual drive-by-wire throttle and everything is 100%, all right? Now, things like trying to set up AC step table or startup step table or anything like that, it's not necessary. You don't need to mess around with that stuff. You just basically want to keep it alive to get up to temperature in the whole 9 yards. So don't get too particular about all of these things. Main ones you want to look at are idle base position table. So this is where I've just basically fudged some numbers in there. Just put 2, well, you can just put basically 2 across the whole table there. Nothing fancy. And then we can go on to idle target RPM table. So remember, this is what the ECU is going to try and target. So you see I've got 1200 RPM all the way to 40 degrees. Then I slowly drop down towards 1000 once it hits 80 degrees from there. So now, because it's closed loop, the ECU is going to try and do its best to go from and make the idle work, okay? We give it a bit of numbers over there. So let's say, let's just do, what should we do? Something like 4 over there. All right, let's just do that. Right, so this should give you enough for the ECU to try and control the idle. You can tweak that a little bit. If it's struggling to idle and it's too low, you can just tweak these numbers up here. I'm just going to chuck some numbers in there anyway. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the fuel table, right? I'm going to say select. I'm going to go across. And I'm going to, let's just go there. It's going to take us up to 4,000. I'm going to set it to 50, right? Nothing fancy, 50 across the whole table. Right, then I'm going to go to ignition. Now obviously I do have a physical, like a base map that I can work from, which gives me semi-decent numbers, but this is just kind of to prove a point. Whole ignition table, 15 degrees. This is absolutely nothing fancy at all. I put 15 degrees pretty much across the whole ignition table, and I've put 50 across the whole VE table. Now remember, this is on a modeled fuel, so I have put all the injector data and everything in. So it's going to work from there. So this is a volumetric efficiency table based on manifold pressure and engine speed. But there it is. I've set 50 across the whole table and I've set 15 degrees of ignition. All right. That's a pretty much completely blank map. And I can go and try to start it. See what I mean? You don't need to have a fancy map. You don't need to have a whole bunch of stuff. You could literally walk up to your ECU, type in 50% across the whole table. Obviously not going to save that. You could type in 50% across the whole VE table. You can type in 15 degrees across the entire ignition table. She will start. She'll start. The closed loop idle control will control the drive-by-wire throttle. She'll keep her idling. Okay, now I could leave that engine. If you are in a position to have a wideband lambda sensor, fantastic. This is why I always do recommend them. If you have that, you could literally leave the timing at 15 degrees because you're only interested in idling, and it'll happily idle at 15 degrees at 1000 RPM of ignition. And you can just go in on your fuel table into the tuning session, and you can actually as well, you could open up the closed loop fuel control. So if you have a look here, in the top corner there, under the fuel tab, you've got closed loop lambda. So if I go into configuration, and I go into closed loop lambda, at the moment, obviously it's off. I can turn it to auto mode for wideband. You basically just set the ECU lockout to maybe like 20 or 30 degrees or something like that. And you effectively, you can set the RPM lockout high at like say 4,000 RPM because you're not going to go above that. And what you can do is then you can just go to your AFR lambda target table and just set it something reasonable. Lambda 1. That's perfectly reasonable as an idle set. You can set it to 1 there. You can leave your fuel table at 50 across the board. Open up your closed loop lambda. do bear in mind there is a limit to how much they can do it. So you have a fuel trim limit of plus minus 15%. You could probably knock that up to maybe 25% if you really wanted to. And you could effectively leave the ECU just to take care of the fueling and try and hit your targets that you set in your AFR Lambda table. Now again, a lot of these base maps and everything are available online if you do want to take numbers from them. With the Link, you kind of have to be very careful, because if you set up the ECU on a modeled fuel, and if you go look at a lot of the maps inside the Link ECU software, they are what they call the traditional. So remember, the traditional is basically based on master injector pulse width opening times. So in other words, if you go in and you go on a traditional style, you set the master pulse widths, let's call it 10 milliseconds. Then this fuel table that you see here is effectively a percentage of the master fuel. So if you set the master fuel as 10 milliseconds, every time you see 100 in the table, that means the injectors are open for 10 milliseconds, okay? It's not the way that I recommend to do it, because obviously volumetric efficiency is so much better in every way, especially if you've got a setup like this where you can actually monitor fuel pressure. You can put that data into the ECU. You can tell the ECU exactly what size the injectors are. You can tell what they flow at a particular fuel pressure. You can put the dead times in. You can put all of that information in. And what's wonderful about the model setup, and it doesn't work for every application, so please, if you have ITBs, you have to go alpha N is where they map it against the throttle position versus RPM, all right? But I always prefer modeled. If you have a normal setup like this, you go like that. The reason being is if you set the volumetric efficiency and it's in the name, it's calculating how much air this engine can consume at a given RPM and a given manifold pressure. What that means is if you set it up on a modeled and you dyno tune it on a modeled setup and you put all of the correct injector data in, if you wanted to upgrade from these 275cc standard injectors to, let's say, an RX8 yellow injector, fantastic. All you got to do is jump into the software, re-put all of the new injector data in, and the ECU can compensate for it. Okay, I would still suggest that you get it verified, but for the most part, you should be 99% there, because all you're doing is you're telling the ECU on the VE map how much air it consumes for a given RPM cell versus manifold pressure. So if you tell it it's got 275cc injectors that flow 275 cc's per minute at 3 bar or 3.5 bar, then the ECU knows how long to open those injectors for. If you then tell the ECU that you've now got 550cc injectors and they flow that 550 cc's at 3 or 3.5 bar, then the ECU is going to go, that's fine, I know how much air this engine is consuming, therefore I know that the injectors are bigger, so if it was opening the 275 cc's for, let's say, 6 milliseconds, it knows that it only needs to open the 550 cc's for a shorter period of time. It's in the name, volumetric efficiency. It's working out the volumetric efficiency of the way that the engine is consuming air, okay? Things like wideband sensors, fantastic. Again, for starting up, you can set it to closed loop lambda, give it a target of like 20%. You can come along, chuck 50 across the whole VE table. You can chuck 15 degrees across the whole ignition table. She will start. You've just seen it here now. She will start. You don't have to spend hours and hours and hours and hours trying to dig through forums, trying to find all these base maps and everything. There is a really quick and easy way to do it. The trick comes in is getting it to the dyno. Get it to the dyno, get it tuned, and then from there, then you can start playing. Because remember, all of these things like cold start, all of these things like intake air enrichments based on intake air temperature, all of those things are what we call adders. So in other words, they take the base VE table that we just saw there that I put 50 across, they take those figures and they add on to that. All right. So that's why I mean, don't spend time trying to get it to cold start or whatever. Don't spend time trying to get it to idle at exactly 800 RPM on your first startup. That just doesn't make any sense. Do what I did. Stick it at 1200 RPM and then gradually make your way down to 1000 RPM. Get it up to temperature. Make sure everything works. Be happy. Get it on a dyno. Get it set up. Bring it back. And then you can start doing it. Look, your tuner's going to do a lot for you. They're going to want to get it to idle really nicely. But this is where I say to guys, if you get your engine tuned in the middle of summer, dyno tuners have the ability to create various weather conditions. They cannot bring your engine down to -2 degrees, which you might experience in the middle of winter. So when you get your engine tuned, they're going to do their best. They're going to pick up a trend and they're going to extrapolate that trend down as the temperature gets low. Obviously, if you get your engine tuned in the winter time, they're able to reproduce those exact cold conditions and they can work their way up from there. So just bear that in mind. The tuners cannot recreate the weather. They cannot change the fact that they couldn't get the engine down to, you know, -2 degrees or to 5 degrees or 0 degrees or whatever the coolant temperature could possibly be at, and get it to run nicely. What they will do is they'll pick up a trend of what it likes to see, and then they can extrapolate that sort of percentage. So as you sort of start it up, they'll add a bit of fuel in because it's cold, and what they'll do is they'll go down through like 10, 20, 30 degrees. They'll see what the trend is and they can extrapolate that backwards. That's going to give them their best shot at actually getting it to do that. But, and I'm going to repeat this again, and I did say at the beginning, please guys, do not spend a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, even 4 hours trying to get this thing to run perfectly. Everything that you do is going to become completely null and void once you get it tuned. Don't waste your time. Get it started exactly like you saw here. You saw how easy it is. You could literally walk in, put 50 across the whole VE table, 15 degrees across the whole ignition table, and she starts. Nothing fancy. I haven't sat here for an hour trying to input a table from a forum or whatever. I've just done that. Like I said, if you've got the luxury of a wideband lambda, perfect. You can set that closed loop fueling. For the idle control, especially on drive-by-wire, just stick it in closed loop. Punch some numbers in there. I just pulled those numbers out of my head. Honestly, I didn't even think about what I was doing. So go ahead, stick those in, get it to idle nicely, let it warm up, make sure everything is working 100%. Then off you go, get it tuned. All right, guys, if you do have any other questions, we are going to be doing more videos on particular things. For the time being, because I've done all the setups and the inputs and the outputs and blah, 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 what I wanted to do was kind of have something to help you guys get your first startup. And now that we've covered the first startup, we do actually have another Link ECU over there on a non-VVT-i, so that's got an idle stepper motor, so that's going to be the next one that we're going to do a similar type of video on how to start up. And once we've done that, what I need from you guys is just requests for things that you guys would like to see. Would you like to see, I mean, obviously it's a first startup is super easy actually when you see it like this, but then you can ask, and we can do things like how to set up the idling really, really nicely. What we can do is we can get a really good map on there for the specific engine, and then I can show you how to add fuel when it's cold. You know, all of these type of compensation tables and so on. I can show you how you set them up and how it works in real life. But you guys need to let me know exactly what it is that you want to see. Let me know what you want to see. We'll get it done. And every time we get a Link ECU through the door with the engine that we can test, I will get it done. So just bear in mind, we do have that one, which is going on hopefully by the end of this week. We're just waiting for some parts because I rebuilt the non-VVT-i engine. Well, not rebuilt, but basically did a lot of work on that one. So I'm just waiting for some gaskets from Toyota and we'll get that one done. But yeah, so remember guys, main principle, first startup, don't stress. You could pretty much put whatever the hell you want in there and it'll start. I mean, I advise 15 degrees because it's quite a conservative number, and put 50% across the whole VE table, preferably set it up in a model mode and put all your data in as per the videos. If you've got a wideband sensor, set the closed loop fueling, it'll take care and it'll go up and down up to sort of 20-25%, I think is relatively safe. And then set the closed loop for the idle control. Let the ECU do its magic. You paid good money for it, let it do its magic. And remember, all you're trying to achieve is to start it up, make sure it doesn't leak oil, make sure it doesn't leak coolant, make sure that the fans come on when it's up to temperature, make sure the system is bled, and then you are ready to go to the dyno and get the whole thing set up correctly. And once that's done, if you want to start tweaking, by all means, because once that's done, your tweaks actually mean something and make sense. But anyway, this is a 19-minute long video for just what was supposed to be a quick startup video. But again, if you guys have any questions, please feel free, comment down below. I'll put a link up to the playlist again now at the top there for all the Link videos that we've done so far. And yeah, we'll see you in the not too distant future with the non-VVT-i one, so we can start looking at how you make things work with an idle stepper rather than actual drive-by-wire. But thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you again later. Bye-bye.